Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Maria Ressa. She's a well-known investigative journalist in the Philippines. She is the co-founder of the news website Rappler. She has been a staunch critic of the regime of President Rodrigo Duterte. And a few days ago, she was found guilty of cyberlibel, and she could face up to 6 years in jail. She's on bail. She's appealing her conviction, and she joins us from Manila. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Maria, this case relates to a story Rappler ran back in 2012 about the alleged ties of a businessman to illegal drugs, human trafficking. But you believe, however, that this has nothing to do with that article, but it's a politically motivated case against you and probably against journalists in the Philippines. Why is that?
Context. First of all, it was a public interest story about a sitting Supreme Court justice that was going through an impeachment trial. So public interest in that story, that was in 2012. The period of prescription for libel is 1 year normally, but just to have this case brought to court, that's been changed to 12 years. And then in terms of context, this is just this one case. But if you look at it in 2018, I had to go through 11 cases and investigations that the government filed. In 2019, I had 8 arrest warrants issued against me. I was arrested twice in a little more than 5 weeks and detained once. I have done nothing but be a journalist.
Obviously, but now there's this prospect of a 6-year jail sentence. I mean, do you have hope that the appeal will be heard, or do you believe the justice system is in the hands of the president and that you stand no chance, essentially?
I can't ever say I stand no chance. I want our judiciary, the men and women there, to actually prove me wrong. I mean, the pattern is bad, right? Let's put it that way. But I think that we filed our motion. It's a partial motion for reconsideration on the 29th of June. It points out 13 things that are wrong with the verdict, huge legal acrobatics that I hope that the Judge Montesa, will address.
Obviously, your news site has attracted the ire of the president, especially for your coverage of his so-called war on drugs, during which thousands of people have died. Do you believe that this is the real reason behind your legal troubles?
There are two. One is the impunity series, which we've continued against this brutal drug war that, according to human rights groups, have killed tens of thousands. The Philippine government itself admits it's about 8,000 people killed. Regardless, that is a huge number. The second is the level of impunity in something we call the propaganda war, how the Philippine government has used Facebook, which has become our internet, to manipulate the way people think, to manipulate the public sphere. We came out with those stories in 2016. We've been under intense attacks on social media first, weaponization of social media, then those same attacks coming from President Duterte and officials in 2018, the weaponization of the law, and then 2019, the arrest warrants, and 2020, a conviction. That narrative was seeded on social media. The narrative that journalist equals criminal was seeded in 2016. Fast forward 4 years, and here we are.
Right. And where are we now in the Philippines?
Democracy's death by 1,000 cuts. You said is Rappler. Rappler isn't the only news group that is under attack. In fact, we came under attack. We were the third news group. The first is the largest newspaper, the Philippine Daily Inquirer. The family that owned it was slapped with legal cases. Within a short period of time, they said that they would sell the paper. The second is ABS-CBN, the largest broadcaster in the Philippines. Soon after President Duterte took office, he said he would not renew the franchise. Fast forward 4 years, May 5th, 2020, ABS-CBN, the largest network, is shut down. Much like with Rappler, a small regulatory government agency gives an order to shut down. In our case, they tried to revoke our license to operate in 2018, in January 2018. In the case of ABS-CBN, it was the franchise, right? And they've been shut down. It's almost 2 months now. You're talking about a network that employs about 11,000 people, a news group I used to run with 1,000 journalists. So Rappler isn't alone, but I think the difference is that we're pushing back hard. We are calling a spade because we believe this time period, our rights are at stake, our democracy is at stake.
Right. Calling a spade, does it mean that you believe President Duterte is a dictator?
I don't know what to call him. I mean, I try not to make it personal. Even when you say that I'm a harsh critic, I am not doing anything I'm not doing anything different from what I've been doing since almost 35 years ago. That's when I became a reporter. I became a reporter in 1986. I would say President Duterte is the most powerful leader the Philippines has had. And we are seeing weak institutions, weak law enforcement, all essentially collapsing to do their bidding. This is new. Look, the last time ABS-CBN was shut down was in 1972, when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. It was shut down for 14 years. ABS-CBN is shut down again now. It would have been unthinkable before this time period. So I believe that we're just standing at the precipice, and President Duterte has put in place measures that is fundamentally changing the rights that are guaranteed to Filipinos under our constitution.
So you're afraid.
Under our constitution.
You're afraid for democracy in your country.
It's been 4 years. So I would say two things really stand out right now. The pandemic. This is our 15th week of a lockdown, right? A pandemic that's largely led by retired military men, the response to it. Instead of putting doctors in charge, we have had the president saying that, if Filipinos break quarantine, he said, shoot them dead. This is frightening. And then the second big development is that a few weeks ago, our House of Representatives passed an anti-terror law that is draconian at best and, again, unconstitutional at worst. Under this, a small group of cabinet secretaries forming an anti-terrorist commission can actually declare a critic, a dissident, somebody who is just critical, declare them a terrorist.
Like you.
When they do that, that person can be, like me, can be arrested without a warrant and held in jail for up to 24 days.
Right. This bill was one of several examples raised during a debate at the United Nations Human Rights Council recently. There was a panel of experts that came out with a very strong report criticizing widespread human rights violation. The UN Human Rights Chief also vividly criticizing, and there is always the possibility to prosecute President Duterte before the International Criminal Court. Do you believe that there is a buildup of international pressure, or that it doesn't affect him at all?
I think the Philippines is playing an outsized role in geopolitical power, right? And we see this in what's happening in the South China Sea. I think the Philippines does care about what the international community thinks, even though President Duterte's rhetoric is that he'd go it alone. He knows he can't. One of the first things he did when he became president in October of 2016 is to go to Beijing and say that the Philippines would pivot away from its longtime ally, the United States, and pivot to China and Russia. That has changed a lot of things. Business has changed in the Philippines. China has come in. In terms of what the UN can do and whether the Philippines is paying attention, it certainly is. President Duterte, as soon as the ICC threatened to look at what was happening here, he pulled out of the ICC, right? So I think part of our only defense right now as journalists is that the global community continue to help us shine the light. Otherwise, all of the brutal deaths can continue. The death by 1,000 cuts, the attacks on press freedom, these can continue with impunity.
Right. Some steps were taken by the traditional U.S. ally, some travel bans on senior Filipino officials, but other countries have not followed suit, including European countries, the European Union. Are you calling on them to do the same, to put more pressure on the regime? And are you disappointed they haven't done so?
It's hard for me to answer that question because I could then be accused by my government of sedition or treason or, let me put it this way. The problem of protecting Philippine democracy is first fundamentally a Filipino problem, but the Philippines plays a global role, and its long-term allies have taken positions and are putting increasing pressure, including the European Union, right? So if you look at this, the area which was activated to take away the visa of the man who actually carried out the drug war. He's now a senator, Bato de la Rosa. When that happened, the Philippine government got upset and actually canceled a long-term military agreement, the visiting forces agreement with the United States. It has just recently reinstated that precisely because the Philippines needs the United States during this time of COVID-19 and during increasing aggressions from China. I think President Duterte has a challenge to balance all of his competing interests, including what China is doing in terms of business and in closer ties with the Philippines.
Maria, Ressa, that's all we have time for. I want to thank you very much for being with us here on the France 24 interview from Manila in the Philippines. Thank you for watching it.